night, but you got to go home with me. I forgot some good old love, and then I got some in store. When I get through throwing it on you, you got to come back for more. Boys and things will come by the dozen, but that ain't nothing but drugstore loving. Pretty little thing, let me light your count, cause mama, I'm sure hard to handle now, yes around. Action speaks louder than word, and I'm a man with a great experience. I know you got you another man, but I can love you better than him. Take my hand, don't be afraid, I wanna prove every word I say. I'm advertising love for free, so won't you place your ad with me? Boys will call my dime by the dozen, but that ain't nothing but 10-cent love. Pretty little thing, let me light your count, cause mama, I'm sure hard to handle now, yes I am. Baby, here I am, I'm a man on the scene. I can give you what you want, just come go home with me. I got some good old loving and I got better in store. When I get through throwing it on you, you got to come back for more. Boys will call my dime by my loving, but that ain't nothing but drugstore love. Pretty little thing, let me light your count, called mama, I'm sure hard to handle now, yes I am. Give me some good old love, some of your good love. I'm a big old man, mama, when I'm too hot.
Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Amazing turnout, all from me. That's incredible. No, elephant in the room. I am not Malcolm Gladwell. No, I am not nearly as intellectual nor as good looking, and I have to live with that every single day. No, folks, good evening. My name is Roberto Escalante, and I have the privilege of working here at Hope at the admissions office right on the corner of College and 10th. And I work with some incredible people to bring Hope College to students, and if we do our jobs correctly, those students to Hope College. And I do sincerely believe that we have the best students in the country. In fact, if you're a student here tonight, make some noise. Where my students at? There we go. Sitting up close to the front like we taught them. Good, good, good. But I got to be honest with you, my job is pretty simple. Don't tell my boss. He might be here. Nate, I don't know if he's here. Oh, he's right there. Hey. Nate, my boss, our job is pretty simple, and that's not because we have a beautiful campus, that we do, but it's because we have beautiful people here. The staff and faculty care about our students, from the professors in the lecture halls to those serving you the food in the dining halls. We have incredible faculty and staff. So if you're faculty and staff, Hope, make some noise. Where we at? Good amount, good amount. And we are in an incredible place, Holland, Michigan. It's a beautiful community, and the community members are super engaged with us as we are with them. So if you're from the Holland community, make some noise. Where we at? Okay, amazing, amazing. And if you're coming from outside the community, all over Michigan or across the state, the country, welcome. Welcome, welcome. My job is to get you guys, what's that? Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah. There we go. Oh, yeah. Make some noise, make some noise. There we go. So my job is to just get you guys hyped up for the amazing, amazing event we have tonight. We are going live when I'm done talking, because they don't want me, going live. But we are going to go live, so people will be able to stream this all across the country. So please feel free to interact with the things that are being said. If you feel like laughing, crying, maybe, I don't know where the night's going to go. But feel free to show your emotions. That makes it fun for everyone. So you guys ready to have a good time? Awesome, awesome, awesome. We're going to do a quick call and response to make sure you're ready. So it's like when I say X, you say Y, X, Y. But we're not going to do that. Sorry for any algebra people out there. They're probably like, yes, X and Y, finally getting the attention it deserves.
President here at Hope College, and it is my great honor to welcome you all here for such a special evening as we explore what it means to be a catalyst of change amidst the broken funding model of higher education and within our own lives as we continually pursue accessibility, generosity, and community on all fronts. Thank you for filling this room and our live stream for such a noteworthy and deserving conversation, and please bear with me and my voice as I get over a cold. As a second semester senior preparing to enter the new world in 2 short months, I can confidently say that Hope College has equipped me to be a catalyst, an agent for change in whatever space I enter next. And this is our hope, our sentiment for all students, that they not only would be agents of change in the spaces that they occupy, but that they would even have the opportunity to do so, the opportunity to be equipped to do so. And that's why we're here today. Hope Forward provides an otherwise impossible opportunity for students to become thoughtful and dedicated leaders of the future. I'm a part of the educational experience that needs to be changed, that all young people should have access to. On behalf of myself and my peers, thank you for your generosity, your curiosity, and for putting value in the student experience. Now, this event tonight is a culmination of the past day and a half of the Catalyst Summit. Some of you may have joined us this morning at our business breakfast, while others engaged in a conversation about pushing the boundaries of innovation in higher education. This afternoon, we hosted several engaging lunch and learn sessions, held a Catalyst conversation on breaking through the tuition barrier, hosted a panel of current Hope Forward students, and witnessed their art. If you joined us for all of these events, or if this is your first one, we are honored and thankful to have you here. And we have an exciting lineup of speakers tonight on stage for you. Ann Snyder is a writer on the topic of class and culture, moral beauty, and a beatitudinal faith. She currently serves as a trustee for the Center for Public Justice and at the University of Chicago's Hyde Park Institute. She is the editor-in-chief of Comment Magazine and the author of The Fabric of Character, a wise giver's guide to renewing our social and moral landscape. Prior to leading Comment, she directed the Philanthropy Roundtable's Character Initiative. Dave Levin is the co-founder of KIPP Public Schools, a network of 280 pre-K-12 public charter schools with 15,000 educators and 175,000 students and alumni across the U.S. Levin currently works with KIPP leaders on instructional innovation, leadership, development, and teacher training. He has received several awards, including the Presidential Citizens Medal, and holds honorary doctorate degrees from Yale and Duke universities. President Matthew Scogin serves as the 14th president of Hope College and is in his 4th year of service. He has a background in the government and financial sectors and has launched a vision for the college focused on developing a business model of excellence in teaching and learning and the future of work, known as Hope Forward. Finally, Malcolm Gladwell, our host for the evening, is the author of 7 New York Times bestsellers, including The Tipping Point, Blink, Outliers, Talking to Strangers, and The Bomber Mafia. He is the co-founder and president of Pushkin Industries, an audio and podcast production company that produces the podcast Revisionist History, Against the Rules with Michael Lewis, The Happiness Lab with Dr. Laurie Santos, and Broken Record. He is an innovative thought leader who is not afraid to push boundaries and challenge thought norms. Gladwell has been included in the Time 100 Most Influential People list and touted as one of foreign policy's top global thinkers. We are honored and thankful for his partnership and thoughts as we pursue an innovative approach to higher education accessibility. So thank you all for being generous with your time and spending it with us tonight, and for being generous in your thought and in your care as you consider being a catalyst for change within your own lives and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Malcolm Gladwell to the stage.
Thanks, everyone. I'm eventually going to sit over there behind that desk, but I thought I'd start here. I'm delighted to be here this evening. I've had a fantastic day and a half in Holland. I spent the afternoon at LJ's. Breakfast sandwich is excellent. I had pizza at Crust 54, which is delicious. So I have nothing but warm feelings towards the coffee shops and culinary establishments of 8th Street. Tonight, we've been doing all these really, really interesting things over the last 2 days. I did a bunch of interviews with people involved at Hope Forward yesterday, with some of the students, and then today, of course, there's all of this fantastic programming. And we're going to, this evening, try to extend the conversation by bringing in 2 really interesting outsiders, Dave and Ann, to talk about, to explore various ideas associated with what you're trying to accomplish here at Hope. And then Matt's going to join us at the end, and we're going to kind of try and wrap it up. So I'm going to invite the first of our guests, Dave, to come out on stage. Dave, come on out, and we're going to sit and talk for a bit. This is very, it's very late night.
Yeah, very late.
Yeah, I feel that
Very late night at 7 o'clock.
Yes, that's right. I feel that we should do stupid pet tricks or something to get in the mood for this. But so here, Dave, here's why I wanted, I requested you for this conversation. Because I feel like almost no one in this country knows more about this question of access to, of educational access. That's the whole game you've been involved with KIPP over the last how many years now?
A long time.
A long time.
30 years.
30 years.
Yeah.
You're now up to how many students in the KIPP program?
So we have 125,000 kids pre-K through 12. Then we have another 55,000 alums, college age or older.
Yeah. So are you saying, so a total of 180,000 kids have passed through your program over the years. That's an extraordinary body of knowledge about and give me a little bit of to the extent that it's possible, a description of what is the typical KIPP high school student like? Where are they? What's their family background? What are their where do they come from? What are they? Just give us a little picture of that person.
Yeah, so our high school kids are awesome, which is rare to say about high school kids in general. No, but we have amazing kids, we have amazing families, often coming from very challenging situations in some of our country's most marginalized communities. So about 99% of our students identify as Black or Latinx. About 90% of them qualify for free or reduced lunch. And many are there, when they go to college, will be the first in their families. Many are not. All are struggling with the very questions that have been discussed today about affordability, access, belonging, completion, career afterwards. So,
talk to me about KIPP's history with that transition from high school to college. So, from the beginning, I'm guessing one of the goals of KIPP was to take kids who might not have considered college as an option or been able to consider college as an option and get them into college.
Correct, right.
So what has been your experience over these 30 years?
So, I mean, I would think about it in four different ways, right? One is like K-12 prep, right? So the better a student, gets to 11th grade, 12th grade, very strong academically, with their identities affirmed, real sense of purpose. We talk about it with we have this thing called purpose, passion, and plan that we ask all of our high school students to start working on. And so the more they know about themselves and feel good about themselves and prepared to make that transition. So our cumulative college graduation rate, for example, in New York City is about 47%. That compares, that there are a bunch of ways of looking at that. Two which are somewhat optimistic and one which keeps us grounded, which is, the national average for all demographic groups is 32%. Their peer group average would be about 11%, so that's almost 5x that. And then, for the top socioeconomic quartile, the college graduation rate's around 75 to 80%. So to really close the opportunity gap, it's not just K-12 that has to change. You also have to then work across the bridge to higher ed. We have 98 college partners across the country where you're trying to really ensure that there's a sense of belonging, a sense of affordability. When we started, we were, it's like anything else. We were happy our kids would, get into college. And then we would talk to their families and, people would take too much debt on. And today people understand debt a lot better than they did 30 years ago. They understood what the ROI on college is. So our kids and families are much, savvier consumers now than ever before. So you have the K-12, you have the bridge to college, you have belonging in college, and then you have the bridge afterwards for career. And for kids who don't go to college, what's the strong launch to their career as well? Because you have a lot of kids who graduate college who don't necessarily pursue a career that they needed their degree for in the first place, and then the ROI on your degree is even worse. So those four transitions, we work, we do a lot around.
Let's dig into those numbers a bit. So your cohort of kids is vastly outperforming their peers who are not a KIPP, vastly outperforming the national average, trailing
top socioeconomic.
So why are they doing so much better than their peers outside of KIPP? What is the special sauce that allows them to what, 4x, college
Yeah.
graduation rate that's 4 times what it would be.
So I mean, I think a couple of things. It's one is it's again, it's the strength of being prepared, right? So if you academically really a strong sense of who you are as a young person, we run a program called KIPP Forward. Ironically, I didn't even realize the irony of that until just now. KIPP Forward, no relation to Hope Forward. But
Matt
we are
just
all
stole it from you.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, we deserve some scholarships over here, man. But it gives you a sense of KIPP Forward used to be called KIPP to College. Then it became KIPP through college. Then it became KIPP through college and career. And then we were like, you know what? Let's just call it KIPP Forward.
Yeah.
Like everything after high school. And to our knowledge, we are really still if not the only, then a very small number of K-12 systems that actually works with their alumni post-high school, right? So a lot of schools do. I mean, I don't know how many students here are in the audience, like anyone? Okay, some, handful. But everyone here went to school, maybe, or at least went to high school, theoretically. But I would bet, how many of your high schools ran support programs when you were in college for you? Right, one down here, couple, right? We do that for all of our kids.
What does that look like?
So it looks like advising, it looks like mentorship, it looks like career counseling, whether you go to college or don't go to college. And so that makes a huge difference. We also have these college partnerships, and the college partnerships don't have preferential admissions or anything like that, but they are committed. Like, not all colleges are built like, colleges do not generally do a good job with first-gen college-going students, students of color, low-income students. Like, that's just not theirs. They don't. So, but some colleges do a really good job with those kids and are actually building. And so we try to build partnerships with colleges who are committed to supporting students like KIPP students and other students like ours.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Just what I'm curious about what that looks like. So the colleges that do a good job of supporting that kind of student and that have entered into partnerships with KIPP, what does that mean? What are they doing?
I mean, you need people like Matt. Like, I mean, not to be like blowing smoke to the host. I mean, there wasn't dinner backstage, so like, it's not too much smoke. You can like, we were grabbing pizza like 5 minutes ago, so like, but you need someone at the very senior level. It doesn't have to be the president of the college, but it has to be someone at the senior level of a college who's actually committed to the success of every kid who walks on the campuses. It's why HBCUs do such a good job, because there is a woven in sense commitment to belonging, commitment to making sure that like Black, Latinx, first-gen kids have the experience, the holistic experience that's needed. And that's why so many of our alumni have had really positive experiences there. What you learn from HBCUs can be replicated across predominantly white institutions, can be replicated anywhere. But it takes that type of like, if a young person gets, starts sliding in college, too often by the time they reach out for help, it's almost too late, right? Like the GPA gets too low, the financial aid goes away, there's some type of challenge where they got to go. So what you need is a community that A, looks out for everybody, B, makes it safe for people to ask for help early on, and C, does it day in, day out. And that's not every school does it. It's what Hope's trying to do, for all of its students, and what they're trying to do at Hope Forward. And we have become, at KIPP, we try to be very intentional in A, preparing our kids to do that regardless of where they go, but also helping them choose places that are predisposed to do that.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with the president of an HBCU for one of my podcast episodes, and he was talking about why would kids drop out of school. So his universe of students are students from largely lower socioeconomic, many of them first in their family, same kind of kids who would go to KIPP, and a lot of it was a life event.
Right.
My dad got sick. Our family income, was cut in half overnight. I couldn't even afford to eat. I had to go home. I had to drop out. It was that kind of stuff. Right. Like, you know, that the margin of error for a student like that once they're in college is razor thin.
It's tiny. I mean, we did a survey of all, we saw that with our alums. We did a survey of all of our alums pre-COVID. And this issue of like something goes wrong and the affordability, like the numbers who chose to go without food so they could stay in school were astronomical. It surprised all of us. And the amount of money was really small, right? So we're not talking about thousands of dollars. We're talking about hundreds of dollars. And so it really is, you know, having an institutional commitment to that. And so what we try to do at KIPP is we have that institutional commitment in case the college doesn't. So that you have it, ideally the college does, but if they don't, they have that with us so that, you know, it dramatically improves persistence. We've also found, and I think Mitch was talking about this a little bit today, we've now started peer, we have what's called near peer fellows, right? So we used to have like older folks, like, well, now I'm legitimately old, but like people like me when I was in my 30s advising our college kids. But now we have our own kids who just graduated college as their advisors, paid advisors. So when you have a near peer it has made it so much, like they know what's going on in a way that our former advisors. So all of this is
interesting because in that sense, you are where Hope would like to be in 30 years. In other words, what you're saying is how much easier it gets over time.
Yes.
If you can start these kinds of self-supporting mechanisms. And
yeah, I mean, I found it when I talked to Matt, and Hope Forward has 58 students, I think today-ish.
Yeah.
You know, when we started in '94, we had 47.
Yeah.
And you know, it's doable. What they're trying to do is doable. Getting it started is the hardest part. Getting people to believe early on is the hardest part. Getting the funding up front is going to be the hardest part. But it's like college is, like my view, is that the way college currently works for the vast majority of Americans is broken. And people are starting to realize that, but they're also sort of trapped because the four-year degree is still, despite the fact that people, like this is, like people talk all the time about how like a four-year degree isn't like the end-all and be-all, except then they go ahead and say to their own kids, but yeah, you're gonna go get a four-year degree, right? And so the question of who doesn't, we don't have like career pathways right now that don't require it, even though we talk as if we do. So, you know, 18-year-olds are still trapped by a system that isn't built for them. And, you know, Hope Forward and other people are trying to change it, and it's awesome.
We're going to ask Ann to come out, join the conversation. Ann, come on, and I do want to, this is, yeah.
Do I move? What do they do on late night? I've never been.
No, Dave, you got to sit
I got to sit here. Okay.
The middle chair. That's the way it works.
Malcolm has been on talk shows.
Yeah.
This is like, oh yeah, move seats. All right.
They always do this thing, you know, notice on talk show hosts is they're always moving the thing of water. You notice that? If you ever watch them, it's like constant motion whenever they want to. Anyway, I'm going to try and do that because I want to be legit in this role. And so you've thought a lot about what a gift economy. Actually, I hate the term gift economy.
I do too, actually.
So give me a better word for it.
Well, I like the word logic because, well, first of all, I'm not an economist. I think the last math class I took was ninth grade. So I'm scared of numbers to some degree and transactional. So somehow the word logic, which my little magazine comment, we were just inspired. I had studied organizations like Hope for some years, across, not just in higher ed, but across a wide range of sectors that just seemed to embody the beloved community, led with sort of a radical hospitality. There was this fragrance of joy. And there are a lot of different ways you could describe what's going on when that's present in a prison sometimes, in a rehab community, sometimes in a business, in an arts colony, on a sports team, in a classroom. But this phrase like gift and gift logic felt like it described it at some level the best. But you're asking what a gift economy is and or why I hate the phrase.
So what happened? Yeah, so there is something, what I've observed, and everyone in this room has observed, is that there's something magical happens when you shift the focus from being a payer to being a giver. And I'm trying to figure out what is that magical thing? What switches are being flipped inside your head when you move from one of those modes to the other?
I think, at some level, it just immediately enters you into a relational reality. You are struck when you give and receive, and that I think is meant to be this constant dialectic and rotation in all of our lives. We shouldn't always be a host. We should also be a guest. We shouldn't always be giving. We should also. That there's an element of need baked in where I think to be part of a truly circular gift economy, you're always asking this question, how long do I hold what I possess? There is movement. It's not just mine to take. So something in that suddenly enters you into the realm, frankly, of love, ultimately. And I think there's something about the creational reality of how we're wired that it creates infinite possibilities for creativity, for how you see value in a person, and it just opens up the space and just gets rid of this isolating, closed-in, battle line drawing kind of air that I think is a lot of what we breathe these days.
I mean, it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking of the last thing Dave was talking about, which was how much easier things got at KIPP when there was a community of people who had graduated from college, who were older, who could serve as a kind of example and mentor and whatever for younger people. But it's a version of the same thing in that when you see yourself as being part of a community of people who are moving through college, the burden is no longer entirely on your own shoulders.
Yeah, and it's not about you.
Yeah, and the movement that you're talking about is the same thing. If I'm not holding on to the burden for the next 30 years, I can pass it on and I can have people share in it. It becomes a much lighter load.
Yeah, I had the joy, I don't know if some of the Hope Forward students who were up on the stage a few hours ago are in the audience, but I was sitting back here watching you, if you're here, describe your experience. I think they're freshmen and a couple sophomores. And you were so much more articulate than I'm going to be about why you chose Hope Forward and what it has sort of opened up for you in ways you couldn't even have imagined. But as I was sitting there, I was thinking, there's a profound way in which this immediately it changes the nature of time and how we think about education. It's like we get a degree, get a job, and all that's good and worthy to have that sense of input leads to output. But there's something about being on the receiving end of being told you are worthy. This is pure gratuity, and all we are asking is that you consider what it is to respond to this kind of grace later in life to future generations. And I was like, what this really is it's immediately creating a multi-generational community, hopefully, if it lasts, and if the sort of logic has this almost eternal thrust to it, where you are giving back not just resources, but your time and your experiences, and that will be sort of this infinite reciprocity. So there's sort of a magic in what can feel like a very practical, big idea that goes much deeper to, I think, the kind of coherent community we'd all like to have, regardless of whether that's in higher ed or in our neighborhoods or in our churches or whatever.
But if it's so here's the puzzle, though. If what you're describing is something that seems totally intuitive, I'm sure to everyone listening in this room, we all understand how powerful this kind of model can be. So why is it so rare? We're here in Western Michigan doing this because no one else is really doing it, right? So I don't understand it. How is it that we've turned our back on by and large as a society? Why have we opted for a system that doesn't work nearly as well?
That's a question for President Scogin, who can probably give you an impression of the faces of the dubious fundraisers or funders that he's tried to approach with this idea, and them say things like, well, what about skin in the game and that whole logic. I'm just going to read something I brought out, actually, that may answer this question. I was editing a piece earlier today that felt so perfect for just being here. Reminded me of, or it gave these words a lot of meaning. And do you mind if I just read like a paragraph? This is
go ahead.
not published yet, but I found it very beautiful. We do. It's very gift logic-y. We publish a series called The Welcome Table, which is basically looking at the power of hospitality specific to civil rights in the US and the role of food in the table and how this surprising gift of the table has been this soft weapon throughout American history. And it's led by a guy by the name of Greg Thompson. So I was editing him today, and he writes this paragraph that he's rooting this a little bit, and this is not to get political particularly, but that a lot of the sort of moral imagination that we've inherited is from a certain kind of, he would call it a colonial imagination. And I just thought this paragraph illustrated why this feels like such a disarming power, what Hope Forward's trying to do. Only conviviality can overcome conquest, because only the convivial imagination is powerful enough to heal the ravages of the colonial one. Because it is the convivial imagination, and this imagination alone, that can invert the old order and lead to the healing of our common life. Where the colonial, and you could swap in there if that's triggering you, could swap in meritocratic or, a bunch of other words we could use, but where it reifies hierarchy, the convivial presumes equality, a table at which we are all welcome. Where the colonial valorizes domination, the convivial prioritizes service, admitting ourselves to others for their good. Where the colonial craves displacement, the convivial celebrates embrace, the open door, the warm fire, the room made ready. I got here earlier today very nervous because, I don't know if you know this, but your mother named you Malcolm Gladwell. So I was very nervous to be here with you today. And this wonderful young woman, I think an alum, Lucy, welcomed me with the most luminous countenance and warmth and kindness and just led with generosity, and I immediately kind of felt my nerves recede, and that's real, what that does to a person. Where the colonial hoards through extraction, the convivial nourishes with care and bestows with generosity, a cultivated field, a laden table, and a blessing on the way. Where the colonial bellows with bloviating sanctimony, the convivial enjoys the quiet delight of the sacred. It is, in other words, here, in the convivial imagination, that we will find the wisdom, strength, and joy necessary to transform both our fearful hearts and our weary communities from places of conflict to spaces of communion. And I should say this is the end of a piece really about Martin Luther King, Jr. So I don't know if that's not entirely answering your question, but I think we sort of have lost the muscles to dream. We're in a broad societal crisis mode where everything is survival. And I think the way people who are leaders in higher ed are thinking, they think you can only solve that through technique and becoming very pragmatic and utilitarian about what an education is for, and kind of lose the enchantment that this is really about hopefully developing human beings that contribute to, and while you're in college even, embody, again, I think the kinds of radically self-giving communities that have some contagious way of bringing out our best angels.
Yeah. You know what? That is actually lovely. We're going to, actually, why is it Matt? Let's bring out Matt now so he can join in this conversation. Matt, come on out.
Everybody, Malcolm Gladwell's at Hope College.
Ann and Dave are also.
I know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.
So here's, I want the three of us.
Intimidating.
There's nothing intimidating about it. This is if you're intimidated by this crowd, this is the friendliest, happiest.
That's true.
Joyous. I wanted to, in listening to you, Ann, and to Dave before, I was thinking, and and to Matt over the course of the last day and a half. The word that keeps coming to mind again and again is pressure. That somehow as a society, I think we have underestimated the amount of pressure that's associated with certain kinds of achievement for a sector of our population. And it's very hard for someone who is privileged to imagine the psychological circumstances of someone else's struggle. We can imagine, oh, I have X amount of dollars, and that person has half as many dollars as I do, so they have to live a little more frugally, but blah, 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 blah. But it's much harder for them to understand the fact that it's psychologically an entirely different paradigm. If you're the first in your family to go to college, if the margin of error in your family is this thin and not that thin, if you have to worry about debt for the next 25 years of your adult life as opposed to, your parents just paying it all off for you. Those are all forms of, it's doable, but it's no fun, and it's psychologically debilitating after a certain point. And when you were talking about the convivial, that whole beautiful paragraph, you're talking about somehow a condition where we can free people from that sort of emotional burden. And I get, in some ways as I listen to you, and this is, Matt, maybe I'd love for you to jump in on this, is we failed on many levels as a society, but on one level we failed to tell the stories of the people who face these kinds of obstacles adequately. We haven't communicated what it means to be someone who has to worry about this kind of stuff and carry that kind of burden. What do you think, Matt?
I agree. I think you're 100% right. I mean, I can't pretend to understand what those stories are like personally, but I've just seen the power of a great education. And I think, the reality is we have created a higher education system in the United States that's building an aristocracy. And it's building an aristocracy in the US under the disguise of a meritocracy. And it's like what Anne was talking about. It's this meritocracy that's just gone off the rails because everybody knows that not everybody has access to a great education. But there's this sentiment underneath that, yeah, sure, not everybody has access to a great education, but it must be the case that those who do get access to it ultimately are the ones who deserve to get access to it. And there's so many problems with that way of thinking, especially if you're a Christian, especially if you're a person of faith, because we believe we don't deserve anything. We believe everything we have is a gift from God. And the only appropriate response to that is to be generous, is to be grateful, is to give. And that's what we're trying to do at Hope. We're trying to radically orient ourselves around, let's really make higher education, the kind of higher education we do here, which is a really high-touch kind of higher education. A student who comes here is known. We don't just know their name. We know their journey that they want to be on, and we're excited to help them get there. And I think for students who come from any background, that's what they need. That's what they need. The research that Raj Chetty has done is just stunning. He shows that if a poor kid and a rich kid go to the same college, they have remarkably similar opportunities for success after they graduate. So higher education can and should be the great equalizer. But of course, what we know is that low-income students and high-income students are, for the most part, not going to the same kinds of institutions, and increasingly, the middle class is not going to the same kinds of institutions.
Yeah, I've often thought the logic, to follow up on that point of Raj Chetty's observation, it's kind of this this kind of dispiriting paradox. The wealthy kid goes to the fancy college because the wealthy kid's parents say it's important for your success, future success, to go to the fancy college. But in fact, it's not for the wealthy kid. Wealthy kid's wealthy. He's going to be fine. It's the poor kid who benefits from going to the
by far.
So it's like the people who are most concerned about getting in are the ones who least need the benefit, and the ones who have the lowest probability of getting in are the ones who most need the benefit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is
the elite schools, over 70% of their students come from the top 20%. And if you really want to reflect the country, the math's not hard. 20% ought to come from the top 20%.
Yeah. What American school has the highest percentage of students from the top echelon? I'm just saying it's just to diss them. It's Washington University in St. Louis.
Interesting.
And basically everyone there is like, it's like insane. It's like this much. But I have a question for Dave. do KIPP students ever express anger at the way the system is set up in this country?
I mean, every day. I mean, we should all be expressing anger every day in maybe a convivial? Convivial. That doesn't bode well for my conviviality. I mean, it is the point about the psychological stress and the psychological pressure is real. And, just the stress of going from where schools exist in an ecosystem. And so there are so many, lost in the political debate around, racism has become like a word that has gotten politicized as opposed to personal, right? Not all of us experience these dynamics exactly the same way. And so there is real anger and, at a system that doesn't feel set up for you. And so one of the reasons I think that KIPP has been successful is we have created an alternate system that is actually set up for your success, is actually set up to affirm who you are, who your family is. And I think the more higher ed is exposed for the inequalities that exist, the angrier high school kids get. And it's actually interesting. I think you're starting to see that anger at schools not just serving, low-income kids. You're starting to see that anger at schools serving more affluent kids because it's getting more and more, despite the fact they don't need to go to the schools they want to are getting harder for them to get into, right? And so they're like, wait, this used to be my given right. It's no longer, and it's like, welcome to the world of folks who grow up on the outside, right? And so I think that actually might bode well for empathy, or it might actually, lead to further sort of I got to look out for mine. More programs like Hope Forward, I think, would be good.
I didn't steal Hope Forward from KIPP Forward, by the way.
I mean, it's all good.
But I love your name.
It's all good.
Okay, thanks.
We don't have any KIPP kids in Hope Forward, but maybe tonight, we'll hammer that out.
Bring them
right
here. Bring them here.
Yeah, I want to see some dealing happen.
That's right. Yeah. Well, let's go. Let's go.
Although the time for you to cut that deal, Dave, would have been before you came.
That's true.
Right, that's when you had
true.
leverage.
That's true. Although it's more convivial to do it afterwards because it's way less transactional.
Yeah.
One thing about the anger, now that I'm saying it, what's amazing is that people aren't angrier. When you think about how hopeful, our students are hopeful in a way that's actually inspiring, given the challenges that lie ahead. So yes, there's anger because they know, but there's real optimism in what can be. And that's actually the more important part of the story, is how, given all the challenges that exist, young people can be so optimistic. The rest of us should learn from that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A question for Anne. Something that I had been thinking about in a different context was, I've been struck by, as many have been, by how unforgiving our culture has become. And one of the obvious explanations for that is the decline of religiosity in our society, that spirituality, faith, is where you learn how to forgive. It's something that's hard. We get taught that, and when the church ceases to play a dominant role in the culture, there's a whole bunch of people who've never been taught how to forgive. And so what happens is that you have a culture that, similarly, the kinds of things that Matt has been talking about, that's trying to happen here at Hope about generosity and such, are things that are taught in churches. And my worry is the decline of the church in our society makes it harder to teach those things, right? How do you, as someone who's thought about this, how do we counteract that? How do you teach things like generosity and humility in the absence of religious community, which was really good at teaching that kind of stuff?
Well, and I would say just a texture to your question or a layer onto it. It, in some ways, yes, like what was being taught was the vocabulary of forgiveness, but it was really more people being regularly placed in a position, a communal space. I'm just talking about sort of broader when say church going was higher than it was, and there was a sense of ritualized worship and confession and all those things. There was an experience consistently of what it is to be forgiven. Not always. There's tons of civil religion in this country and nominal faith, and so not everyone has necessarily can say they've had that even if they went to church their whole lives. But I do think it's like a deeply relational experience that does something to your soul, and you can experience God's forgiveness in the context of a human relationship, a friendship, a marriage, anyone you've wronged. And I think to somehow be able to receive that, that's sort of the only way in which you know how to offer it, because of the power of what it is to feel immediately worthy while previously feeling so unworthy. So the questions around like the future of the institutional church are very, very complicated, and I have sort of spiritually probably unorthodox views on this right now, because I'm not sure there's hope in the institutional renewal right in the next generation. But I think communities like this that have been informed by essentially like 2,000 years of a tradition that is steeped in gift and notions of forgiveness and what it is to receive first, that then generates certain kinds of lives and transformation. This place, which is an academic institution that is rooted in that stream, if you can embody it again in this communal way, having a lot more of this out there in civil society broadly, I think is a way to create this sort of whole other set of rivers, while the institutional church is sort of stuck in its own, I would argue, like bureaucratic questions.
I asked that question because I had this really weird experience, not weird, wonderful in some ways, but chastening a little bit to me experience. A couple years ago, I grew up in a very Mennonite community in southwestern Ontario, not far from here. And I once went to the Christmas dinner of a friend of mine whose family runs a feed mill. It's a big business. And it was their Christmas dinner, and they said at the whole the employees were there, and they said at the thing that we do at our Christmas dinner is we hand out bonuses. I said, okay, that's weird. But so at the end of the evening, the boss, the CEO of the company, stood at the front, and every one of the employees came up and he gave them an envelope. We sat down. And then at the end, after it was all over, someone came up and it was all huddled. And then the boss stood up again and said, I made a mistake. Would, Mrs. So-and-so come up, please? I'm going to give you another envelope. And then he sat down. I said, like, what's going on? How did you? Because I was thinking, these are bonuses. These are performance bonuses. What was the mistake you made? He goes, our bonuses are based on the number of children you have. And Mary just had a baby and I forgot. So I had to give her extra money. And the thing that was chastening to me about that is that in a million years, I would never have guessed that bonus for them was a gift to the people who needed the money the most, and not a kind of market-based measure of your productivity at the company, right? That's how far, I grew up in that community, but that's how far our culture has pulled us away from the idea. And my next thought was, is there another company? Is there a company in America that rewards bonuses on the basis of how many children you have? Right? Like,
Is there a company that passes out bonuses at a Christmas dinner either?
Yeah, that's right.
mean,
But I mean, that's my point is like, this is how far we've moved away. 100 years ago, by the way, I imagine there were many. They didn't invent this idea at this company. I think they borrowed it from their grandparents, right? But we've moved so far away from, this is the part of me that's like worried that this experiment isn't replicable because we've moved so far away from these ideas. Matt, are you going to introduce a child-based bonus at Hope College?
We'll take it. Let me take that to the board. We'll see what they...
No, I actually was serious.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. Most of our
kidding.
students don't
I'm
have
te-
kids.
I'm teasing.
But
I don't want to get you in trouble.
you are, yeah.
But this brings up a parallel question for all of you, and that is, so if,
And she wasn't bragging about this, but she was processing through we just don't like to pair conversations about money with conversations about relationships, right? I mean, or I don't like to. I think it often feels like two different realms. But she was wrestling through the practicalities of essentially like putting your money where your mouth is, and she was thinking a lot about friendship and the power of friendship in her life. And she lives in New York City, and just decided somewhere along the way, as like part of what I call the Venmo generation, that she was not going to split bills anymore whenever they went out for dinner. That instead there was this sort of sense that the debt to one another would sort of be sloshing, in her words. It was not tit for tat. It was for her to just like take care of it, and then that was itself an act of trust that this would be a relationship for the long haul. And I kind of, as she was more articulate about it, but as she was describing that, I thought that's just a very, very tiny little thing that is saying, at the base of my like day-to-day reality, I don't believe I'm my own island. And something about that, I think, has much broader ramifications.
It's a beautiful, she wrote an article about this, the woman you're talking about, and she called it imbalance. Like she said, she's intentionally stepping into imbalance.
The intimacy of imbalance.
Yeah, and just trusting that over the course of that lifelong friendship, that imbalance would work itself out. And I wonder, Malcolm, if the answer to the question is that we just start doing it. Do you just start creating imbalance? Like, is the best way to create a generous culture just start giving stuff? Jesus has this line, Matthew 10:8, freely you receive, now freely give. And I wonder if giving starts with receiving. Do we just start giving stuff away? And I think one of the provocative things we're doing with Hope Forward is we want to give away our education to everyone, including those who could afford to pay it up front, including a student who could be a full-pay student. We're saying, no, we're going to put everyone on the same playing field, and we're just going to give you an education. And in return, we're asking that you make the same commitment, that you pay it forward, that you give after you graduate. And I wonder if there's something there. I wonder if it starts with just living it out, with creating that imbalance as an act of faith, as an act of trust, trusting that over the course of the relationship, that imbalance will work itself out. And that's the difference between a transactional relationship and a relationship that's based on just mutual trust. A transaction is you give and then you receive. A mutual trust is I give and I don't know exactly when I'll receive something back, but I'm just trusting that it's going to work itself out over time.
And it's so dignifying. I was just like, again, watching the students up here earlier today, like just thinking about, they really feel so deeply that they have been entrusted with this gift. And it is a gift of dignity to say, I trust your freedom to do with this as you will. And yes, you're sort of pledging to be loyal and pour into future generations, but that sort of, it's like a delicious, like, sort of, you're putting your metal where your mouth is if you say these people are created in the image of God, like the God-like part of us that does have that interior freedom. And I think to trust them with that, there's something, you're testing all the truths we say in church every Sunday.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I hate to take church to, like, meeting my wife speed dating, but...
Let's go. Let's do that.
Malcolm took wonderful to weird, so, like, I think I did meet my wife speed dating, but I'll come back to that. It's related to this idea of trust, but, can you quote another author when you're talking to you? Is that, like, even socially acceptable? So yeah. I don't even know whether, like, Stephen Covey's book, which I don't even know whether, like, it's like you can talk, I don't even know where it stands anymore, like, but the first thing I remember out of it, and I don't even know if it's the first one, but here's this idea of, like, seek first to understand, then be understood. And it relates to meeting my wife speed dating because, never mind. But you basically have 12 speed dates, 6 minutes. And so I went in and I was like, okay, my goal, right, was I was just going to listen. There's 6 minutes, right? I was like, you know what? I don't need to be, like, whatever. I'm just going to be, like, I'm really going to be listening, really be curious. And I was like, oh, I should have been doing this my entire single life. Because it was actually, it was an imbalance and it was trust, and it was seeking to understand before being, and so like, is there, to answer your question, is there a simple thing we could do to become a more giving culture? Even before we get to the type of ideas that the two of you are sharing, I just think if we listened first, really listened, that would be a gift that has become much harder. I end up texting with my kids and they're in the next room. And so, this idea of what conversation looks like has changed. And I just think, so when you guys were talking about imbalance and all that, I was wondering about just the simple imbalance of listening versus talking.
I had this fun thing we did last year on my podcast, which was we had an episode devoted to magic wands. If you gave someone a magic wand and they could do whatever they want, whatever experiment they wanted, what would they do? And the best one, someone gave it too late to put it in the podcast, but it's still the best one ever. So these are serious magic wands. You could change reality if you want. And my friend, a friend of mine said, this is my magic wand. I would like everyone in America to put their address on a slip of paper. It gets put into a giant hat, and then you reach in and you pull out another address, and you have to live there for a year. And if you think it through, so we're forcing us all to do this.
Paging Congress right now.
Yeah. So I can think of no more efficient way of building a generous economy than that I force you to walk in someone else's shoes for a year. And almost certainly most Americans would be walking in the shoes of someone whose life is profoundly different from their own. Right? That's majority of the people. Maybe the person makes as much money as you, but something about their circumstances would be different. And it's that kind of shaking people out of the sense that they are on an island by themselves and giving them perspective into other people's lives is another, I think, trigger for this kind of. But I had a follow-up for Dave, and I want because I think it's incredibly useful for people at Hope College to hear a little bit more about someone who's 30 years in as opposed to 2 years in.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your relationship to your alumni?
Yeah.
You got 55,000 people who are KIPP graduates out there.
It's the best.
What is their relationship to KIPP?
It's the best. Before we do that, if you want to fix public school, if you want to fix school in America, do that with school.
Yeah.
Right? So you live in a place and you just get randomly assigned a school in that place. You don't get to choose. And then people would care about other people's kids' schools. So right now, the only school anyone cares about is their own. And that's not only because they're cynical. It's just because, how much bandwidth do you really have? Right. So the best thing, we got so many things wrong 30 years ago. So many. I mean, we could have a whole, discussion. Fortunately, that's not tonight. But the thing we did get right was this idea that it was never about school, it was about life. And that we were going to make a commitment to each other, it sounds a little cheesy for life, but this idea that we were going to be there for each other. And so I wouldn't say we're in touch with 100% of our 55,000. That would be impossible. But we're in touch with a lot of a lot. We have an alumni network, but there's just deep relationships between the alumni and the schools they went to, the organization. People move across the country. Alums now have their kids, because our alums, we have all types of alums in their late 30s. And so we have alums who have kids in our school, who have teaching in our school, so it is the best thing that we have. Our alums are obviously our biggest advocates. We do not do any type of organized fundraising with our alumni, given the demographics of our organization. But we have a lot of alums who are donors. Our alums are on boards. Our alums are running schools. Our alums are soon to be running our region. So they are a growing force. They're running for office. We have an alum who's the youngest school board member in Newark. So I can go on and on. So it is very hopeful for Hope. And the other thing is, you said something, Matt, or Malcolm, you said something about scale. I don't think anyone here should worry about scale, this idea. Like, we didn't think about scale at all for like the first 8 years. And we would never really, we thought about excellence. We thought about how do we make the idea work and live and breathe and I think that's actually what led to our scale. We weren't out thinking about the next KIP. We were only worried about the KIPsters who were at our school then. And so I think, to me, when I saw the Hope Forward students, like, that's excellence in the making, right? And you have 3,200 kids here, is that right?
Yeah, 3,300.
So, like, if you could have Hope Forward for 3,300, like, that would be a home run. And that's actually doable, right? I mean, it's probably someone listening to Malcolm's podcast could just write you a check and be done, right? It's like,
Malcolm.
We can do a separate session, if you like, on the economics of podcasts, which would be illuminating, I think. But I'm not quitting my day job as an investment banker, just put it that way. Wait, serious question, because I think Matt should hear this. What mistakes did you make in the early going?
So I think since we're on the topic of college, right? Well, one of the biggest mistakes we made just basically is we started in middle school. There are a lot of reasons we started in middle school, but it would have been better had we just started in elementary school and grown all the way through. But the biggest mistake we made in terms of college, and just in emphasizing the importance of education, right, which we still do today, for alumni who, for whatever reason, either didn't go to college or didn't finish, they did not feel like they still belonged, always. And so while it was never our message, and in fact we did everything not to send it, there was this sense that there was it was like college or bust. And that was I would say that was one of the biggest things that we got wrong, is we didn't explain, like, college is a means to an end. It's not the only means, it's not the end. It's not the only way to get to the end of a choice-filled life, of a career of meaning. And at the same time, the risk of making this overly nuanced is that you don't clearly articulate. I mean, you are also talking to, like, teenagers. And at that, like, teenagers don't have the most, like, my 14-year-old can hold one thought, my 12-year-old can hold maybe a half a thought, right? And I really hope they're not watching this live stream. But it's like you can't make it overly complicated, right? So in essence, still, the best predictor of career satisfaction, of a bunch of opportunities, is still a college degree. We shouldn't water that down. And yet, it isn't college or bust. And we did not thread that needle well enough. We also didn't have high schools, so we had to kind of convince everyone of this in a short period of time. But that would be the biggest thing that we got wrong. And I think related to what you're working on, we also what we did get, we didn't think about fundraising. We weren't fundraising at all then, but we weren't thinking about what it would take to fundraise forgetting the big scale, but just how do you get enough of what you need? We were just happy for every check, which is on one hand important. On the other hand, you got to figure out how you're going to get to the number that you actually need to serve 3,300 kids here. Yeah. Back to Malcolm's podcast, the investment banker listening to your podcast.
Yeah. Can you talk along those lines, Matt, about what are the conversations like that you have with alumni? You've obviously, in trying to raise as much money as you're trying to raise, by definition, many of your conversations are going to be with people who did not go to Hope.
Right.
But I want to hear about your conversations with people who did. Mm-hmm. What are those conversations like? What are some of the challenges?
I think what's interesting is, in part, it depends on when you graduated from college or when you graduated from Hope. If you graduated 4 to 5 decades ago, the cost was much different, and you were probably able to pay it yourself or work a summer job and figure out how to pay it yourself. And so I think, and obviously if you graduated within the last decade, it's been a dramatically different story. So I think I would say our more younger vintages of alumni are like really get immediately what we're trying to do and why it matters. And I think with some of the people who have a little bit more distance between themselves and their college experience, I think it takes a little bit more of an understanding. Like, you can't work enough summer jobs to pay tuition at its current rate, and you certainly can't work a side job while you're trying to be a student and make enough to have any consequence in terms of paying off your tuition bill. So yeah, I think I would say for the most part, our alumni are really excited about it. I think, like I said, I think Hope is a great school, but it's very, very expensive. And what I always say is, like, college is priceless, but it's way too expensive. And I think everybody gets that. I think our alumni get it. I think the whole world gets it. I think the crazy thing is that no one is really doing anything, in my view, no one is really doing anything interesting or innovative to really solve that puzzle. And that's why I say we're stuck in this system where higher ed is creating this aristocracy. We're just perpetuating privilege, and no one is really going after it. And we're called Hope. So who better than a place called Hope to say we're going to run toward that challenge, not away from it?
Question for all of you. Does this discussion about, I'm particularly interested in Anne's response to this question, but do these discussions about generosity and giving, do they transcend ideological divisions, or is there a version of this that gets caught up in the same left versus right fights that disfigure so many of our conversations?
I've learned the hard way that unfortunately everything can get ideologized. When I did this project on character some years ago, I did not realize there was a whole right-leaning set of definitions and a whole left-leaning, and so I've sort of not gotten cynical, but sobered by that. And I think that could happen. I'd be interested to know with skeptics who could frame the opposition from the left versus the right. How I could imagine what it would be from the right. I'm curious what it would be from the left.
Both sides. Yeah, I think a common right of center critique would be, this feels like free education.
Free, not again.
People won't appreciate something if they're not paying for it. Another sentiment, which tends to come from a more right-of-center perspective, is why don't we do this only on a need-based basis, and students who can't afford to pay, they should just pay. And then from the left-of-center perspective, I often get, I love Hope Forward. I just don't understand why they're making a commitment to give. Like, why don't we just make it free? Why don't we just hand out the education without any kind of commitment on the other side? So yeah, I think I get it. I get critique from all different perspectives, and yeah, everything is politically charged now.
And it is, when we first met, Matt, it is also it is a distant relative. It's not even, no, I shouldn't even say that. It is, you have to make it clear that it has nothing to do with income sharing agreements, right? Which is what, in our first conversation, because that idea is just another form of bondage, right? This idea that you can go to college for free, but in exchange you give a percentage of your income. Like, there are a bunch of places that tried that, and they're all rolling it back because it was a bad idea from go, right? Because it just reeked of resentment down the road, but it got crushed politically from both sides. And this has nothing to do with that, but you kind of have to make it clear that this is a horse of an entirely different color.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dave. ISAs, I think, are, in essence, a different flavor of a student loan bill.
Right. Worse flavor.
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to do is move away from a system based on debt and based on bill paying to a system based on gift giving at its core. Mm-hmm. And that's why we make it very clear to our Hope Forward students, you're making a commitment to give. But we don't suggest an amount. We don't specify an amount. We don't suggest a percentage of income. Nothing like that. Because as soon as you do, it's no longer a gift. It's you're fulfilling some contractual obligation, and then it's a transaction again. It's not the, what's your fancy word?
Ask the shiny pink shirt. Convivial.
Convivial.
Yes.
People are really struggling with that word,
I know.
convivial.
I also just think
It's, you know what it is? You know why? We're in a town called Holland. The Dutch, the kind of, I mean, I don't
Careful
want to
here, Malcolm.
No, I'm not dissing. No, let me, you guys are jumping ahead. You're trying to guess what I'm about to say.
No, because you're testing the limits. Could Malcolm Gladwell be canceled in Holland? Right? Could it happen?
No,
Could we be here?
No. I say this as someone with genuine affection for the Dutch. In fact, I know this is a cliche, but my best friend is Dutch. True, true.
You have so many chances to turn back.
No. And I believe everyone of Dutch descent in this room will agree with me. The Dutch are a people of a certain amount of emotional restraint.
That's true.
Is that accurate or is that not?
I think that's accurate.
It's the non-Dutch people who applauded just now. Because the Dutch are sitting on their hands.
And what does this have to do with convivial?
Yeah, where?
No, I'm wondering why are we having such difficulty with the phrase convivial in Holland, Michigan? Because the Dutch have a little problem with convivial.
Oh.
But none
Do
of
I
us
have
are
to spell it out
Dutch.
to you? No, you're in the spirit of the Dutch. I got wooden shoes yesterday. The spirit of the Dutch infuses all that we're doing. Wait, now I've totally lost my way. I had a really good question.
I mean, that was just gold. Everything for the last 2 minutes was just gold.
Where was I? I had a really
Question for Anne.
Ideology in general.
yes. Well, I'm actually I actually think the beauty of this idea is I do think properly framed, it is one of those wonderful ideas that people are going to try and politicize it, but it's non-politicizable. It doesn't fall. You can't with a straight face, you couldn't convince a Republican this was a Democratic idea or a Democrat this is a Republican idea, right? You can't
I
do
think
it.
that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And given that it has such an obvious and beautiful relationship to Christian teaching, if we think this is a political idea, then we must be saying that Christianity is a political idea. And if that's the case, we're all sunk, right?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
The problem is a lot of people have come to think, especially over the
Yeah.
last few years, that Christianity is a political idea. And somehow the Christian church feels like at times it's gotten hijacked by a political movement. And we talk at Hope all the time about how do we actually follow Jesus. And I agree with Anne's description of the church. I don't know. I mean, I think we're in a moment when I think maybe we need to reorient ourselves around the ethic of Jesus and actually following Jesus. And I don't know what the institution of the church is right now, but I think as for our community, and I think like this is one of the ways we can just live it out. Like let's follow what Jesus says and do what he says. And I think Hope Forward is a result of that.
Yesterday, when I met with some of the students, I was joking with Matt that they were better at this than you are.
They are.
I think they are. And I will say several things, that the full beauty of what you're doing did not occur to me until I listened to them, that there was something. And the way they expressed it, there was a young woman at dinner with me yesterday at the afternoon session that I had with a couple of students named Olivia. I don't know if she's in the room. And is she here? She spoke very, very softly, so I had to lean in, probably Dutch, and who expressed the kind of ethos of this so incredibly beautifully. And what was that, I could just have taken what she said, and it was a million miles from anything that could be politically misinterpreted. You know what I mean? It was about, taking lessons straight from the scripture and just saying, this is something we are called to do. This is a kind of version of God's will. I mean, it's put that way so simply and so powerfully, it can't be subverted.
That's right. I totally agree. Yeah.
I'll just say, I was thinking about this again, listening to the students, because I had a similar,
They're better than me.
students embody.
They are better than
But
me.
it is genuinely difficult I don't know if this is an American moment and problem, or this is just something true about the nature of language and words and what sells in the public square and persuasion. But we live in a time when it's very easy to articulate things that we battle around, our fights. We can, the sort of argumentative, policing mechanisms, who's in, who's out, who's right, who's wrong, that you can wrap a lot of language around that, and we have, our media has, our politics certainly has. And I struggle with this a lot as someone who's in the realm of words vocationally, but who's often trying to commission work that is both embodying a spirit that I saw in the students today and is sort of telling the stories of this convivial imagination. And I don't quite know what that is. Like, you have a very tricky role selling this in words. I think you do it beautifully, actually. And I mean,
We'll bring Olivia
like
up
I
here.
was sold right away. But there's something there to wrestle with because, you know, a lot of people will say cliche things like, why does the media only tell really negative stories all the time? Like, so much of life is common grace, and like, this insanity that I'm seeing in the headlines is not what's happening, in mine. There's so many other things to talk about. And that's very real and true. But I've just been thinking there's something about the nature of language that doesn't capture the personalist power of what it is to be to receive a gift, feel undeserving, and then suddenly be glorified by it and be transformed and pour it back out. There's something about that is, I think poets capture it, I think musicians can capture it. So the exemplars of you students, I think is the real deal. And unfortunately, you have to get educated. You can't go on like a TV tour right now to evangelize this, but your lives will tell the story.
Yeah, right.
We have a few minutes left, and so maybe we should start thinking about last thoughts. I thought I would throw the floor open. Do any of you want to kind of say anything in summary? This is the end. We are coming to the end of this marvelous summit. You managed to get 3 New Yorkers to come to Holland, Michigan in March. This is like an unprecedented achievement on many.
I mean, anything's possible now.
They clap for New Yorkers in Holland, Michigan, so they say it's possible too.
But maybe I'll kick it off. I'll give my last thoughts.
Great, perfect.
Like many people, I worry a lot about the fact that many people lack a sense of belonging and purpose, right? They wonder why they're here. They wonder who's with them. And even if this experiment fails on a kind of financial basis, I think it may well succeed on a kind of spiritual basis, in that it has given people a sense of belonging to a cause greater than themselves. And I say that with confidence because listening to Dave talk about 30 years have passed since KIPP was founded, and there are still people walking around who identify themselves as KIPPsters years after they have left KIPP schools and gone on to doing a million other things, and whose lives are now filled with all manner of pressing obligations, and that identity has stayed with them, right? They are loyal to something that you created 30 years ago, right? And there's 50,000 of them walking around America, which is insane. That's the army of people, right? And that's like, even if KIPP were to tragically go away next year, there's still an army of people walking around with that identification. And that's like, there's something incredibly beautiful about what you're trying to build and what you have built, Dave. It's the same notion, and it's something we desperately need. Anyway, that's my parting homily.
It's good.
Who goes?
I'll share. I think about that's very kind. Thank you, Malcolm. I think about I guess I think about the 4-minute mile. Didn't you write about this or have something about this in one of your books? Well, whatever, maybe not. But someone wrote about it. But this idea that people couldn't run, there was a thought that people just could not break. That was like an immovable accomplishment. You couldn't break the 4-minute mile mark. And now you have high school kids running a 4-minute mile, right? Like you never see it in the paper anymore. It's like, oh, someone ran the 4-minute mile. And like, this seems to me as like that. This seems like an immovable idea to people, that college could be free based on the idea that it could be supported in the future by the beneficiaries of that gift. And right now, people are saying, "Oh, it's not financial." People are in the weeds as opposed to, in the ethos of which it was created, which is, it's wonderful. The students are incredible, and the idea is incredible. And I think, why not 30 years from now? This is the norm. This is just how. And while you had the good fortune of starting here, there are places that could actually afford to do this today. Right? Just, you're not quite in those shoes yet, but the idea is good enough for the people who could afford it. They should just start doing it. Of course, they won't give you credit, but that's besides the point. It's not about that. It would be your gift, your imbalance.
That's good.
Anne, do you want to part with?
Well, I'm so glad you encouraged Matt and Hope Forward not to think immediately in terms of scale. Everything about this doesn't smell like empire to me. It smells like yeast in the dough, and this society needs some new yeast. I don't know who all got into like sourdough bread baking in early COVID, but I actually didn't. I love to cook, but somehow I didn't get into that trend. But there was people were handing around, sharing that it's like starter. What is it? Starter dough? Starter yeast?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And I feel like that's what this is. And my sort of theory, my sort of observation of how culture change happens is sort of twofold, and they're basically the same thing. One is like a small group of people, like a creative minority, find a better way to live, and over time, like everyone else, starts to sort of copy them. And I think that could happen not just in higher ed, but in a variety of communities with this, just as, and then the other thing is, I'm not sure I'm using this word always the right way, but one of my favorite concepts that is very related to gift is just this a word called generativity, which is, I sort of define in this context, if like you're a Hope Forward student, you have this experience, like right away you come in, you understand this education has been given to you, you are invested in, you are like embedded in this broader community. You go through that experience, you're transformed by it, you're in this community, you're shaped as the gem tumbler, the whole thing, and then you go on to become a police officer or run a hospital in Kenya or work at Goldman Sachs or wherever you go, whether you're a leader or you're middle or whatever these hierarchies are in the broader world, you create mini hopes wherever you go, mini Hope Forwards. Just because of something you've absorbed that you can't even put into a formula, but is in your bones that you sort of transmit. And that's real, and that's cultural change person by person, but also sort of institutional culture by institutional culture, and that ultimately scales. I think it's sort of the way of Jesus in many ways when you think about the word discipleship and replication over the centuries. But that's what really excites me, that this is yeast that feels very pure, like it's scrambling all the political categories, and we really need it.
So good. Malcolm, this morning at breakfast, you told a story of a 26-year-old who came up to you and was kind of lamenting that their career wasn't as successful at that point as they had wished. And then in our conversation with Michael Crow at 10 o'clock, he said that his journey was a 15-year journey to set a vision and see it through. And then I hear Dave Levin talking about they started at 47, and we're now in year 2, and we have 58 students. And so one of my big takeaways is like, don't despise the small beginnings. The small beginnings can turn into something very, very big, but we should be proud of the fact that we've got something here that's really cool, and I'm just starstruck that I'm on the stage with these three amazing people, and that means this thing, yes, it's small, but I think has the potential to be something very, very big. So that's one thought. Second thing, we haven't talked this evening about mental health, but mental health was one of the things that has come up a lot over the last 24 hours. And I think we have something here that can really be a force for good in terms of helping create a better dynamic around mental health. The CDC put out a study in 2019, so before the pandemic, showing a very direct correlation between debt and negative mental health. And they actually focused specifically on student loan debt. And I think in part there's, and you pointed this out last night in your remarks, Malcolm, that there's a very clear connection between what we're trying to do and the mental health epidemic in the US. And then the last thing, I just think, I think we have the potential not just to help fix higher ed, not just to help fix, if those two things weren't big enough, fixing higher ed and being a force for good in terms of correcting the trajectory around mental health, this whole last conversation we had, if we can help renew faith, if we can help renew faith in Christianity, that's amazing. And I think what we're trying to do here is show, we started with the premise the business model of higher education is totally broken. And then we went to what Jesus says, and Jesus creates this crazy upside-down economy where he says it's the poor and the lowly and the meek who are actually closest to God. And we think that means Christian educators ought to be pushing hardest on access and affordability. He creates this crazy upside-down economy where he says it's those who give who will receive. And we're trying to base our entire model around giving. And then the whole message, if you just strip out everything and boil the whole message of Jesus down to one sentence, he's basically saying, you're covered, now go and live differently. And I think that's what we're trying to say to our students. You're covered, your tuition is covered, now go and live a different kind of life, a life that's focused on impact, a life that's focused on bringing hope to a hope-deprived world. So I am going to cry, but I'm feeling so hopeful right now. So thank you.
Thank you to all of you for speaking so beautifully and powerfully on this, and thank you to all of you in this room for coming and supporting this noble mission. And I wish you every good fortune with it.
Thank you.
So, thank you. And my little screen says that welcome Gerald Griffin to close. Gerald, come and send us on our way.
Do we go back or do we stay here?
We stay here. He's just going to say thanks.
I'm here. Well, thank you, everyone. While our time together here at the Catalyst Summit is ending, we know that the work continues. I'm Gerald Griffin. I'm the provost here at Hope College. Today's stories, visions, presentations have been singularly focused on change, concerted, holistic innovation that will more directly align talent with access and opportunity. It's my honor to share notes of gratitude on behalf of the entire Hope community for those helping the vision of this summit become a reality. First, we give honor to God, who is the head of all of our lives, and just say, Lord, we submit all of this to you. Thank you to our speakers, Malcolm Gladwell, Doug Conant, Ann Snyder, Pete Cadence, Michael Crow, Dave Levin, Jim McFarland, President Scogan, Mitch Albans, and multiple staff, faculty, and our students. Hope Community, Board of Trustees, I want to say thank you. We thank our corporate sponsors, Lakewood Construction, PNC Bank, National Nail, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Blue Care Network of Michigan, Smith & Howey, Creative Dining Services, Brett and Pam Vanderkamp, Pushkin, Conant Leadership, Comet Magazine, and Hope Chicago. We'll be eternally grateful. And most of all, we thank each and every one of you, both that you're here, located in Holland, right here in this auditorium, as well as those that joined us online. for walking with us on this journey today to advance higher education. Your time and attention and participation are greatly appreciated. So again, say thank you and have a wonderful evening.